The words hit me before I even realized I was listening. "Don't tell her about the trip." My mother's voice was a silken whisper, low enough for most to miss but sharp enough to carve through me standing just feet away. I was at the airport, gripping my travel bag, frozen in a moment of disbelief. The family was planning a weekend getaway, a trip I'd silently funded for years now, and I wasn't invited. Not even a hint. I watched Melissa's eyes sparkle with excitement, and my mother's smile was warm, but closed off. They were conspiring in plain sight, and I was the outsider in my own family. How ironic, considering I'd paid for much of this, handing over thousands without a word, because that's what I'd always done. The responsible one, the pillar holding the family together. I remember the nights spent poring over Melissa's college applications, the stress of managing tuition payments that topped $30,000, and the countless calls to cover emergency bills when the brakes on my father's car failed, or when a neighbor's pipe burst and flooded the basement. Every time I was the silent bank, the emotional anchor, the fixer, yet I was invisible. No thanks, no acknowledgement, just the weight of expectation. My father, Shane, stood not far off, eyes darting between us, his face tight but silent. He was the enabler, always watching, never stepping in, terrified of rocking the boat, of stirring the family pot. I felt the sting of his passivity like a bruise beneath my skin. My secret weapon, the only thing I had that no one else did, was my meticulous record-keeping. I had spreadsheets filled with every penny I'd contributed, every bill paid, every emergency handled. It was a private ledger of my sacrifices, a silent testimony to the burden I carried. I was exhausted, drained to my core, but not defeated. Something inside me flickered, a spark of defiance, as I slowly stepped forward and tapped my mother's shoulder. "Mom?" I said quietly, forcing my voice to stay steady. The moment was small, but it was the first crack in the wall of silence. I wanted to believe they'd suddenly see me, appreciate me, or at least acknowledge my existence beyond the shadow of Melissa's glowing light. But as my mother turned, her eyes flickered away, and the secretive smile never faded. I swallowed the lump in my throat, swallowing years of invisibility with it. The airport buzzed around me, the hum of travelers and the distant announcements a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside. I stood there, the forgotten daughter, the unspoken sacrifice, wondering how long I could keep holding this family together when they didn't even want me to come along. Back then, the favoritism was a quiet poison seeping through every family gathering, every birthday, every holiday. I remember one particular summer at Melissa's high school graduation party, the air thick with excitement and the smell of grilled burgers. Melissa was the star, the golden child, showered with gifts and praise. Her new laptop, a sleek, shiny $1,200 Marvel, gleamed under the string lights, a trophy of her achievements. Meanwhile, I nursed my cracked phone, its screen spiderwebbed from months of neglect. No one asked why I hadn't fixed it. No one noticed the way I quietly slipped out of the room to avoid the embarrassment. The family budget seemed like a fortress built around Melissa's needs. Dance classes, private tutors, college fund contributions, they all flowed towards her, while I juggled part-time jobs to cover my own essentials. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself, everyone deserves their turn, or Melissa needs more help right now. But the imbalance was as glaring as the sun outside that summer night. When I dared to confront my father about the unfairness, his response was to bury his face in the morning paper or change the subject with a clumsy joke. Shane's avoidance became a pattern, a shield against conflict that left me exposed and unheard. At family dinners, Melissa's accomplishments were toasted with wine and laughter, while my own successes were met with silence or thinly veiled criticism. Greg, my older brother, rarely took sides but sometimes threw a mocking comment my way, as if to remind me of my place. The subtle, relentless favoritism cemented my role as the scapegoat, the one who carried the weight, bore the brunt, and got little in return. I folded myself into the background, hoping one day the scales might tip, that I might be seen not just as the family's invisible servant, but as a daughter worthy of love and respect. Over the years, I became the family's financial backbone, the one who made sure the bills were paid, the emergencies handled, and the chaos kept at bay. I quietly funneled over $75,000 into tuition fees for Melissa, medical bills for my mother, holiday airfare, and even the down payment on Melissa's first car. It was a hidden ledger of sacrifices, one that only I knew the full value of. At a recent family barbecue, I slipped some cash into my father's hand to cover another shortfall in Melissa's tuition. His eyes flickered with discomfort, but he said nothing. Melissa barely glanced at me, offering a careless, "Thanks, I guess," as if I were just an ATM that dispensed money on demand. My fiancé, David Simmons, was the only one who saw the toll this took on me. He was my anchor, my confidant, the voice that reminded me I deserved better. At night, he'd sit beside me, holding my hand, urging me to stand up for myself. Yet I kept my suffering silent, masking it behind smiles and nods, afraid that rocking the family boat would only drown me further. My secret power, my detailed financial tracking, became a way to make sense of an unbalanced world. I knew who benefited from my sacrifices and who simply took without giving. But knowing didn't ease the ache, just sharpened it. The first time I felt the sting of public humiliation was during Melissa's birthday dinner. I had prepared a toast, carefully crafted to acknowledge the family's support and to subtly remind them all of the sacrifices we made for each other. The room was warm, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, but when I began to speak, Shane cut me off sharply. "Save it for someone who cares, Heather," he snapped, his voice cold and unexpected. The words hung in the air like a slap, silencing the room. Melissa laughed mockingly, a cruel edge to her tone. "You're always so serious," she jeered. The relatives and family friends shifted uncomfortably, the atmosphere thick with tension. My cheeks burned with shame and hurt, but I forced myself to stay calm. I swallowed the sting, telling myself they didn't mean it, that this was just another family drama to be endured. I smiled, raised my glass, and let the moment pass, hiding the storm of pain and doubt swirling inside. But beneath the surface, a seed was planted, a quiet but persistent doubt that maybe I wasn't the family's backbone after all. Maybe I was just the punching bag, the one everyone leaned on until I broke. That night, as I lay awake replaying the scene, I realized things were shifting inside me. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. The fracture had begun. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but I felt it like a slow freeze creeping through the room. Shane's eyes, usually averted or glazed over in avoidance, now held a sharpness I hadn't seen before. Quiet, calculated. After my small resistance at the birthday dinner, I noticed him pulling Greg aside during family gatherings, whispering in a tone just low enough for me to catch fragments. "Heather's making things difficult again, always complaining." I could see the flicker of unease in Greg's smirk, but mostly he just nodded and shrugged me off with a cold indifference that stung worse than any outright insult. Karen, my stepmother, who had always been a passive observer, suddenly seemed to mirror Shane's dismissiveness. I caught her eye once, hoping for a flicker of sympathy or a sign of alliance, but instead, she offered a tight smile and turned away as if I was a problem to be avoided. Even neighbors I once trusted began to come around, their polite smiles masking half-spoken whispers. At a block barbecue, one neighbor said, "You know, Heather's always been a bit too demanding, doesn't know when to stop," in a tone that felt like a punch to my gut. Flying monkeys, Shane had called them once, referring to those who would do his bidding without ever facing me directly. They emerged from the shadows, circling, chipping away at my defenses. The gaslighting was relentless. When I tried to bring up the financial imbalance at a casual family dinner, Shane's voice came low and firm. "You're twisting facts, Heather. Always making drama where there isn't any." His words were like a cold wave, knocking the wind out of me. Melissa shot me a glare, her lips tight, as if I'd just insulted the family name. The worst part was the silence from others. No one stepped in to defend me. My support network, fragile to begin with, shrunk rapidly. I was isolated, a silent target, and Shane's passive stance only served as a shield for Melissa's unchecked favoritism. No one wanted to rock the boat, No one wanted to believe the backbone of the family was breaking. I started second-guessing myself, questioning if I was really the problem. The ache in my chest grew heavier with each whispered comment and averted glance. Yet, beneath the exhaustion and the shrinking circle of allies, a stubborn spark of defiance burned. I wouldn't be erased so easily, even if the family tried to rewrite my story without me. I knew I needed to try something different, something that didn't involve silence or quiet compliance. So, gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I decided it was time for a family meeting. I spent hours compiling my spreadsheets, detailing every penny I'd poured into Melissa's tuition, the emergency car repairs, the countless vacations paid for in cash. When the day came, I stood in the living room, heart pounding, and laid the papers on the table. "I've supported this family financially and emotionally," I said, voice steady despite the tremor inside. "But I feel invisible. I'm tired of being the forgotten one." Shane looked at me, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he nodded slowly, but then quickly deflected. "Heather, this isn't about money. We're family. We should be supporting each other." His words felt like a slap wrapped in silk, dismissing the facts without addressing the pain. Melissa rolled her eyes, crossing her arms, clearly annoyed. The tension was thick, and when our Uncle Jim tried to mediate, his words cut deeper than any dagger. "This all sounds petty," he said, shaking his head. "Families have their quirks. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Heather." I left the room crushed, the weight of their dismissal pressing down like a physical force. My detailed evidence, my emotional pleas, they were all brushed aside as trivial complaints. Shane's avoidance was in full effect, shielding Melissa and maintaining the status quo. I felt like I'd shouted into a void, unheard and unseen. The failed attempt to find peace through dialogue deepened my sense of isolation, marking a clear message. Fairness wouldn't come from talking. It was a silent verdict that my role in this family was set, and it wasn't the one I wanted. The next few weeks were a blur of strained smiles and whispered rumors. At the annual community fundraiser where I volunteered tirelessly, my heart was heavy with hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd be recognized for my efforts. Instead, I watched from the sidelines as Shane publicly praised Melissa for organizing the event. The spotlight, the applause, the gratitude, it all belonged to her. My hands ached from the hours of preparation, my voice hoarse from coordinating volunteers, but no one saw me. The sting of invisibility was sharper than before. Later, word spread that Melissa was quietly telling people I'd taken credit for the work of others. I heard it through the grapevine at the local coffee shop, where acquaintances I'd once considered friends exchanged glances and murmurs. Invitations to volunteer roles dried up. My professional reputation began to suffer in ways I hadn't anticipated. The financial strain at home worsened as I picked up extra overtime hours at work, but none of it translated to respect or recognition. The community, once a sanctuary, had become another battleground where my value was questioned and diminished. The cruelty was deliberate, calculated. Melissa's smile when she told a neighbor, "Heather always wants the spotlight," was a weapon sharper than any knife. I felt the rift between us widen beyond family walls, a chasm that swallowed my hard work and left only humiliation behind. The pain was no longer private. It was public and piercing. I realized then that my role as the family's financial and emotional backbone made me vulnerable not just inside the family, but out in the world too. The fracture was no longer subtle. It was a chasm threatening to swallow everything I'd built. Desperation gnawed at me. I needed to confront Shane one last time, away from the watchful eyes and whispering ears. We met in the dim quiet of the kitchen late one night, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My voice cracked as I said, "Dad, I need us to be honest about how things have been. This can't continue like this." I searched his face for something. Remorse, understanding, any sign that he saw me beyond the disappointment and inconvenience I'd become. He shrugged, a gesture so small but so final. "You're making mountains out of molehills, Heather," he said flatly. The same words Uncle Jim had used. No apology, no acknowledgement of the years I'd carried the burden. His words were a wall, cold and unyielding. I felt the weight of rejection settle over me like a suffocating blanket. My plea for fairness and honesty met a brick of indifference. The line was clear. My needs were secondary. My pain irrelevant. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house pressing in, I understood something fundamental. Words alone wouldn't heal these wounds. The hope for change through conversation was gone. The family I'd tried to hold together with love and sacrifice was fracturing beyond repair. And in that quiet moment, with tears burning behind closed eyelids, I realized I had reached a point of no return. The last few weeks had been a never-ending blur of quiet, crushing disappointment. It felt like every time I tried to speak up, my words bounced off invisible walls, dismissed as if my feelings were nothing more than childish tantrums. Family members, even those I once thought might understand, had labeled me overly sensitive. My pain was reduced to a mere inconvenience, a disruption to their comfortable narratives. Each icy glance, each whispered comment felt like a blade, and I absorbed every single one, my heart shrinking further into itself. David, my rock, faced his own battles trying to shield me. His family, protective in their own way, pressured him quietly not to get too involved, warning him against stirring the pot. I saw the strain in his eyes when he came home after those conversations, how he clenched his jaw, trying to be strong for me. But even with him, the distance grew. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was a sense that I was becoming a ghost in my own life. I questioned everything. Was I imagining it all? Was I just too sensitive, too demanding? The doubt gnawed at me relentlessly. One night, when the house finally fell silent around me, I pulled out the shoebox where I'd kept years of receipts, bank statements, and spreadsheets, my secret ledger of sacrifices. The paper felt cold and sharp in my hands, a tangible record of all the invisible debts I'd paid. I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the harsh white light revealing the staggering numbers: tuition payments, car repairs, vacations I'd quietly financed. The math was undeniable, but it only deepened the ache. Despite every dollar I'd contributed, the acknowledgement was nowhere to be found. The financial truth was a bitter balm, a reminder that while I carried this family, they refused to carry me. The silence of the empty house was deafening as I sat there, tracing lines of numbers with trembling fingers. The receipts told a story my family refused to hear, a story of relentless giving without gratitude. My thoughts spiraled. Was my worth really just counted in dollars? Had I failed to protect myself in this quiet war of neglect? Each figure on those sheets was a piece of my heart laid bare, and I felt more alone than ever. I wanted to scream, to break through the walls of indifference, but all I could do was sit in the quiet and wonder if the family I loved would ever see me at all. Thanksgiving arrived with a heavy weight pressing on my chest, the kind that tightens your throat before a storm. The house buzzed with the usual pretense. Smiles, forced laughter, the scent of roasting turkey masking the tension simmering beneath. I tried to keep my place, blending into the background like always, but something felt off that evening. When I noticed a plain envelope slipping out of the cluttered family mail pile, my heart skipped. It was addressed to Melissa, but I'd never seen it before. Inside was a plane ticket, an expensive surprise for a trip I knew nothing about. My breath caught as I overheard my mother whispering to Melissa, "Don't tell Heather." The words hit me like a punch, cold and deliberate. The exclusion wasn't subtle anymore. It was brazen. My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to keep quiet, but the betrayal was too raw, too loud. I stood, voice trembling but rising, calling out the secret. Why was I left out? Why am I always the last to know? The room froze. Eyes darted away from mine. Shane avoided my gaze, his silence louder than any defense. "I've supported this family more than anyone," I said, my voice cracking but gathering strength. And yet here I am, forgotten. The weight of years pressed down on me in that moment, the invisible wounds laid bare in front of everyone. The relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances, the air thick with unspoken truths. For the first time, I wasn't going to be the quiet supporter or the family ATM. Something inside me shattered, the part that hoped for fairness, for love, for acknowledgement. In its place, a cold clarity took root, steeling me for whatever came next. The drive home after Thanksgiving was a long blur of headlights and tears I refused to shed until I was alone. I locked the door behind me and sank onto the couch, the silence swallowing me whole. Years of sacrifice, silence, and invisibility crashed over me in waves. My mind replayed every slight, every dismissal, every moment I'd been the family's invisible backbone, only to be cast aside when I needed them most. Anger, sharp and raw, bubbled beneath the exhaustion. I was furious, not just at Melissa's cruelty, but at my father's cowardice, at Shane's failure to protect me, at the family that let me slip through the cracks. I let the anger wash through me, finally giving voice to the pain I'd buried for so long. The pattern was clear now. This wasn't neglect born of accident. It was deliberate. Melissa's favoritism, Shane's avoidance, Karen's silence, it all pointed to a truth I could no longer ignore. For too long, I had blamed myself. But the story I told myself was shifting. Never again. I whispered into the dim room. The words of vow carved out of pain. The weight of years began to lift, replaced by a flicker of empowerment. I wasn't invisible. I was not the family's forgotten daughter. I was a force to be reckoned with. The next morning, I called David, my voice steady but resolute as I shared everything. The plane ticket, the exclusion, the years of silent sacrifice. His response was immediate and unwavering. "It's time they see the truth, not just feel it," he said firmly. For the first time, I felt the possibility of a real plan, a strategic path forward. We spent hours outlining what needed to be done, gathering bank records, invoices, any evidence that could no longer be ignored. The numbers I'd collected would no longer be private burdens. They would be undeniable proof. With David's support, I crafted the first step, a formal request to Shane and Karen for copies of all family expenses, framed as a push for transparency. It was a small but deliberate move, a way to crack open the door that had been slammed shut for decades. I felt a fire building inside me, a shift from the exhausted people-pleaser to a woman ready to claim her dignity, to demand justice. This was no longer about pleading for recognition. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The quiet seed of change had been planted, and I was ready to watch it grow. I sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of my laptop screen illuminating stacks of bills, receipts, and bank statements scattered in front of me like battle plans. It hit me then, the full extent of how much this family leaned on me. Not just emotionally, but financially. Every tuition payment for Melissa's college, every emergency car repair for Dad's truck, countless holidays and family vacations, they all traced back to my credit cards, my bank accounts. The numbers weren't just figures anymore. They were the invisible threads holding this fractured family together. I reached out to an old college friend, a forensic accountant who owed me a favor, and we began sifting through the chaos. She confirmed what my gut had suspected. The financial records held undeniable proof of my contributions and, more critically, of glaring inconsistencies in the family's own spending claims. Melissa's supposed college fund was more a mirage than a reality, propped up entirely by my silent payments. Medical bills Dad claimed were covered had never been paid by anyone but me. The realization settled in like a stone in my stomach. They depended on me far more than they knew, and I held the documented truth of it all. Somehow, the knowledge felt both empowering and terrifying. I had always been the family's quiet backbone, the one who kept everything from collapsing, but now I saw that backbone was a secret fortress only I knew was there. They believed their financial footing was stable when, in reality, it was propped up by my sacrifices, hidden beneath layers of denial and favoritism. I felt a surge of clarity mixed with anger. If I could show them this reality, if I could reveal the truth behind the smiles and casual dismissals, maybe then I could change how they saw me, how they treated me. But first, I needed to prepare carefully. I needed to turn these scattered pieces into something impossible to ignore. I became a ghost moving through the house, careful to keep my calm, even as the storm brewed quietly beneath my composed exterior. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, I smiled and nodded, hiding the turmoil inside. While Melissa flaunted her oblivious confidence, and Shane lounged in his passive comfort, I was quietly building an arsenal. I meticulously organized every receipt, credit card statement, bank transfer, and invoice into detailed spreadsheets, all password protected, backed up to encrypted drives hidden away from prying eyes. My records were a tapestry of sacrifice, but I wove them with precision and care, transforming raw data into undeniable evidence. I didn't share a word of my work with anyone except David, whose steady presence was my anchor. He encouraged me to keep the facade, to bide my time until the moment was right. Meanwhile, Shane remained blissfully unaware, absorbed in his conflict avoidance bubble, and Melissa acted as if the world owed her everything. Karen, too, watched but said little, her silence a mirror to Shane's. The house was a powder keg, and I was the unseen spark ready to ignite change. I found myself replaying every family event, the forced laughter at birthday parties, the strained thank you murmurs after I quietly paid for Melissa's latest designer shoes, the casual assumption that I would always be the fallback. I felt the heavy weight of years of manipulation tighten around my chest, but I kept my voice low, my smiles practiced. Every moment of warmth I gave was measured, every interaction a mask hiding the fire of transformation burning within. This was no longer about survival. It was about strategy, about reclaiming my power quietly and deliberately. One gray afternoon, I sat in a local cafe, nursing a lukewarm coffee and scrolling through emails when a woman approached my table. A stranger at first glance, but with eyes that carried a familiar pain. Laura Benson, Shane's daughter from a previous marriage. I recognized her name immediately, but had never met her until now. She slipped into the chair across from me, her voice low and steady as she shared pieces of her past, years of neglect, financial exploitation, and the same passive enabling that had strangled my own family. Her story was a mirror reflecting the shame and isolation I'd carried alone for so long. She told me how Shane had quietly let her struggle in silence, how he'd avoided confrontation while Melissa was showered with favors in my family. It was a revelation that cut deeper than any argument. This wasn't just my battle. It was a pattern, a web of betrayal spanning decades and children. Laura handed me a folder thick with her own financial records, echoing my own meticulously kept files. Suddenly, the audit I'd been compiling expanded beyond my immediate family, and the stakes became painfully clear. Confronting Shane meant unraveling years of denial, exposing a legacy of broken promises and silent suffering. I felt a fierce surge of resolve. If I was going to fight, I wouldn't be alone anymore. Laura's presence was a lifeline, proof that Shane's facade was cracking, and that the quiet storm I'd been preparing for was about to become a reckoning. The weight of betrayal pressed down, but beneath it, a burgeoning power surged. This was no longer just about me. It was about breaking a cycle. With that new fire burning inside me, I began taking the first steps in my plan. I drafted formal requests, carefully worded but firm, to Shane and Karen, asking for copies of all family expense records dating back several years. I couched it in terms of transparency and financial clarity, knowing they would never suspect the true intent behind my request. I held back my usual financial support. No more paying for Melissa's credit card bills or covering last-minute family emergencies. I closed off access to joint accounts linked to my contributions without warning. The ripple effects were immediate. Melissa's credit card was declined at a grocery store, her face flushed with confusion and anger. Shane was caught off guard when a series of unexpected questions arose about family finances during a local community meeting. Yet they didn't connect these shocks to me. Their denial was thick, a shield they clung to desperately. I watched quietly as cracks began to appear in their carefully maintained control. I felt the tension in the air, the silent panic beneath their smug facades. It was as if a hidden current had shifted, one that only I knew was there, pulling at the foundations they believed immovable. I stayed calm, maintaining the same composed presence they expected, but inside, a fierce satisfaction bloomed. The first moves were subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but they marked the beginning of a new chapter. For the first time in years, the family's illusion of dominance was breaking, and I was the catalyst. The dining room buzzed with the usual hum of forced cheer, the clinking of glasses and murmurs of small talk, drifting beneath the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon-spiced pies. The room looked like any other Thanksgiving gathering, but my heart hammered with a tension I couldn't shake. I sat at the head of the table, clutching a neat stack of papers, my silent arsenal. The faces around me, familiar and yet somehow distant, flicked between polite smiles and barely concealed curiosity. Shane's eyes avoided mine, flicking nervously to his wife, Karen, while Melissa sat rigid, her lips pressed into a tight line. Greg lounged with his usual indifferent smirk, pretending he didn't care what was about to unfold. As the meal wound down, I cleared my throat, the room growing quiet as eyes turned toward me. "There's something I need to say," I began, voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with every word. "For years, I have been the family's invisible safety net, covering college tuition, paying off debts, financing vacations, and handling emergencies that no one else seems to notice. I've contributed over $75,000 in direct and indirect support to this family, yet I am still excluded from trips, celebrations, and even basic respect." I laid the documents on the table, spreading the spreadsheets and receipts like a gauntlet thrown down. The numbers stared back at them, cold and undeniable. A murmur rippled through the guests, shock tinting their expressions. Shane's face drained of color, and Melissa's scowl deepened, her eyes flashing with anger and fear. "Look here," I said, pointing to the columns of transactions, tuition payments, car repairs, family vacations, all paid with my money, meticulously recorded. "These are the facts you chose to ignore. I've kept quiet for too long. From this day forward, I am setting new boundaries. I will no longer be the invisible provider, the forgotten daughter. This ends now." The power in my voice surprised even me, but I felt it coursing through my veins, a reclamation of all the silent suffering and sacrifices. The room fell into stunned silence. Shane's jaw clenched, his usual retreat into avoidance shattered by the weight of undeniable truth. Melissa's lips trembled, her mask cracking for the first time in years. I sat back, my shoulders squared, no longer shrinking into the shadows. I was no longer the girl who quietly endured. I was the woman who demanded to be seen and heard. The champagne glasses on the table gleamed in the soft light, but it was I who was sparkling now, radiant with newfound strength and an unyielding resolve. The family's world had tilted, and I was standing firm in the eye of the storm. In the days that followed, the fallout was immediate and relentless. Shane's phone buzzed nonstop with frantic calls, his voice rising in frantic, hollow apologies as he scrambled to contain the damage I'd unleashed. I overheard him pleading with Karen. "We have to fix this. Heather's accusations, they can't be true. We need to make this right." But the damage was done. Melissa, sensing the shifting tides, launched her own campaign of charm and manipulation, whispering doubts to distant relatives, painting me as the villain, the greedy sister trying to tear the family apart. Yet, beneath the surface, the tide was turning. Conversations that once skirted around me now acknowledged my truth quietly, allies emerging in unexpected corners. Shane's once solid grip began to fracture as his complicity was laid bare. The community meetings where he once commanded respect now ended with sideways glances and questions he couldn't answer. His enabling silence, his favoritism toward Melissa, all of it was no longer invisible. It was exposed, and it weakened him. I held firm, steadfast in my refusal to accept empty promises or slip back into old patterns. Each apology I heard felt hollow, each plea for forgiveness a thin veil over the same neglect and exploitation. I was done waiting for them to change on their own terms. I was rewriting the rules, and the family had no choice but to listen. As the weeks dragged on, Shane's desperation grew darker. The passive avoidance gave way to aggressive tactics. He unleashed a small army of flying monkeys, relatives and family friends who whispered behind my back, spreading rumors that I was greedy and ungrateful. "She's only after money," one said, betraying the family for selfish gain. Melissa pressed mutual friends and acquaintances hard, sowing seeds of doubt, attempting to isolate me socially. Invitations stopped coming. Texts went unanswered. Even Greg, aloof as ever, began to distance himself, a silent spectator to the chaos. But I was ready. I met each smear with quiet dignity, never rising to the bait. I consulted with a lawyer, understanding the legal boundaries and safeguarding my position. The threats of lawsuits and vague warnings bounced off me like rain on stone. My records were airtight, my resolve unbreakable. Shane's attempts to manipulate and intimidate only deepened his isolation. Slowly, those once eager to take his side began to pull away, recognizing the toxicity beneath his facade. I watched, calm and composed, as the web of lies unraveled around him. The family's foundation was crumbling, and I stood, unwavering in the rubble. Months later, the calendar had turned full circle to another Thanksgiving, but this time, the scene was different. The warmth of David's home wrapped around me like a protective cocoon, filled with laughter and genuine smiles from friends who had stood by me through it all. The ghosts of the past lingered faintly, but they no longer held power over me. I reflected on everything: the years of invisible labor, the betrayal, the courage it took to stand up and speak my truth. The financial audit hadn't just exposed abuse, it had restored balance, respect, and, most importantly, my sense of self-worth. Shane and Melissa's shadows had faded from my life, their influence diminished. I had set boundaries that were no longer crossed, built walls that protected rather than imprisoned. I was no longer the family's forgotten daughter or the silent ATM. I was a woman reclaiming her dignity, her voice, her life. And though the family might never be perfect, I was finally free. In the quiet glow of that peaceful evening, I felt a hope I hadn't known in years, a hope rooted not in sacrifice, but in strength and honesty. The future stretched before me, uncharted and bright, and I was ready to step into it with open eyes and an unshakable heart.